Hello, I'm Earl Arms, and welcome to a special edition of Black Nouveau. On this episode, we're going to focus on one of the cornerstones of American democracy. That's our right to vote. Many people are calling this year's presidential election one of the most significant contests in our nation's history. Wisconsin is considered a major battleground state, and the turnout by African-American voters is drawing a lot of interest. Alexandria Mack reports on the efforts to engage young Black voters. There's a strong push to get people to vote early. I talked to Claire Woodall-Vogg, Executive Director of Milwaukee's Election Commission, about ways to guarantee your absentee ballot is counted. Having our votes counted has been an ongoing struggle since the end of the Civil War. Here in Wisconsin, Ezekiel Gillespie tried to vote in Milwaukee in 1865. He was denied a ballot. He then sued, and that case went all the way to the Wisconsin Supreme Court, where he was eventually victorious. And in 1866, he became the first African-American to vote in Wisconsin. Since then, there have been many efforts to deny people of color the right to vote. James Causey talked with historian Reggie Jackson about some of those efforts.
During the April primary election, there was a drastic cutback in the number of polling places from 180 to 5 in Milwaukee. Yet, thousands of African-Americans in our city stood in long lines, risking their health during a global pandemic just to vote. Joining us to talk about voter suppression in Milwaukee is historian Reggie Jackson. Hey, Reggie, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, James. Thank you so much for having me.
So what's the history of voter suppression in Wisconsin?
You know, it goes back many years. In fact, before Wisconsin was a state, the first election in the state was in 1835 when we were part of the Michigan Territory. And there was an effort to get every male in Milwaukee County to vote. And there was one Black man by the name of Joe Oliver who they weren't going to let vote. But there was one young white man who said, if you don't let Joe Oliver vote, then I'm not going to vote. And so Joe Oliver became the first Black to vote in the state of Wisconsin in 1835. And then when Wisconsin became a state, it was a ballot referendum asking if Black men should have the right to vote in the state of Wisconsin. And it passed overwhelmingly in 1849. But the Wisconsin Elections Commission made it null and void by saying that since a lot of people didn't vote for the referendum but voted for governor, that they're going to count every person who skipped that referendum as a no vote. And so it would be 31 years before the next Black man would vote in the state of Wisconsin when Ezekiel Ezekiel Gillespie voted in 1866. So it's a long history going back many years. And throughout the time when the Black population increased, there have been efforts underway to, make sure that the Black vote wasn't as strong as it should be, not just here in Milwaukee, but throughout the state of Wisconsin.
Reggie, why is voting during the pandemic considered voter suppression?
Well, the number of polling places was reduced, as you said. That was shocking to people because it wasn't announced far enough in advance. Many people didn't know where the polling places were. They had trouble getting to the polling places. The fact that people had to stand in extremely long lines for hours at a time. In a pandemic, when people felt that they shouldn't have to risk their lives, they thought that at some point the authorities would step in and say, listen, we're going to postpone the election, move it back until a time that's safer. So the fact that that election was held in the authorities that had the ability to postpone it for safety reasons decided not to do that. And it really made sure that a lot of people who would have voted otherwise weren't able to vote on that day. So it really suppressed the number of people who voted and many people who waited in those long lines. I've talked to several people and they waited for so long that they just had to leave. They had other things to do late that night. And so they never had a chance to vote. It really made a big difference in the turnout in that primary in April.
So there's been a big push for absentee voting. President Trump has supported it at one time, and now he's saying that, it can't be trusted. He says there's a lot of problems with it. First of all, I want you to talk about that. Then I want to know, how can I guarantee that my vote, if I vote absentee, it'll be counted?
Well, the idea of absentee voting, that's what my wife and I did in April for the primary. We voted, we got our ballots and we submitted those through the mail. And, unfortunately, you don't know if your ballot is counted. once you submit it, whether it be through the mail, or if you go to the Elections Commission's office and you submit the ballot, you're just assuming that it's going to be counted, but you really don't have any way. And I think part of the reason that there's this debate about this type of election in terms of people voting absentee, all polls across the country show consistently that about 70% of Democrats plan to vote in the November election absentee ballots, and only about 30% of Republicans plan to vote using absentee ballots. So, from a political standpoint, the different parties have different, ideas about what's going to work. And obviously, if President Trump, feels that Republican voters are going to vote, in person, obviously he doesn't want those absentee ballots from the Democratic Party to be as strong than the Republicans would be. So there's going to be debate, even though he supported it in the past, and he's voted absentee himself during the course of his life. Now all of a sudden he says that there's all of these issues with it, and there's no evidence of that. Throughout many elections, we've been using absentee ballots for a number of years across the country in many places, and there have been no irregularities that were worth even having a conversation about.
So the appeals court reinstated the Republican-backed law that allows local election officials to offer only 2 weeks of early voting before Election Day. Where does that stand right now? Is it still at 2 weeks, or has that been extended?
As far as I know, it's still at the 2-week mark, which is significant. That's a significant change from what it was before. And I don't know if there are a lot of people that are even aware of that. I think that change happened, and it wasn't, really all that newsworthy. It didn't get a lot of play in the press. So I think there are a lot of people that are assuming the system is what it was before, and they don't know that period has been shortened significantly from what it was before.
There's still talk about, having an ID to vote. Is the Wisconsin voter ID law, is that considered voter suppression in your opinion? Should you have to have an ID to vote?
Well, it's absolute voter suppression because when those laws were passed, a majority of the voter ID laws, including the one in Wisconsin, were passed as a result of what happened with the presidential elections in 2008, 2012, when Barack Obama was elected. In 2012, the black voter turnout in that presidential election was the highest in U.S. history. In fact, it exceeded the white voter turnout in that election in 2012. And many states put in place voter ID laws with the intention of suppressing the black vote. They can say that that wasn't what the intention was. They can say that there are these irregularities with people not having IDs, but they knew that it would suppress the black vote. And even one of the Republican lawmakers in Wisconsin almost came right out and said that, that's going to help the Republican Party. We know that a majority of the people that have trouble getting identification cards are people who are in the black and brown community. And so the impact of that was tremendous. And here in the state of Wisconsin, studies show that somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 25,000 people basically missed out on voting in the 2016 election because of the voter ID law, which is a significant number considering that President Trump only won by about 22,000 votes.
Let me ask you this. So there's been a spike in COVID-19 cases throughout the state of late. It's been a major spike. What impact would COVID have on this upcoming election? What do you think is going to happen?
Well, I think it's going to have its greatest impact among young people because most of the newer cases have been among young people, 18 to 24-year-olds. And so, these students, as they've gone back to college campuses, they have contracted the virus, and it's going to make a big difference because many of these students, because of the lockdowns now on the campuses, they've actually left the campuses and they've gone back home. So they may be a student from out of state, and now they're doing virtual learning. That means they're not going to vote in Wisconsin. They're going to go back to Minnesota or Iowa, wherever they may be. So for students who are, out of state students who made a residence here in Wisconsin, it's going to make a big difference. And I think that as we continue to see, increased number of cases, people are going to be afraid, just as they were back in April, James. People were terrified to go out and vote. And I don't think that that's going to change because we're going to continue to see Wisconsin leading the nation in terms of the increase in cases in the last couple of weeks. That if that trend continues and if that trend continues to go up, which I believe it probably will, then we're going to see a huge impact on the election in November.
Well, thank you, Reggie. This is very important, and it's important for everyone to get out there and vote. Really appreciate your history lesson on voter suppression. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks, James.
Today, many African Americans under 30 don't seem to think voting is important. Alexandria Mack joins us to explain.
A recent study by American University found that compared to their elders, Black men and women under the age of 30 have far less enthusiasm for voting and far less trust in elected officials. I spoke to some young organizers on where presidential candidates are missing the mark in engaging the youth vote.
Yes, we're no fools. We won't let you ruin our schools. Yes, we're no fools. We won't let you ruin our schools.
There's like a narrative that young people aren't engaged in politics, and I think in the process of the work that I do with LIT, I've learned that it's the other way around, that politics doesn't want to engage with young people.
Leaders Igniting Transformation is an organization that works to develop the next wave of young Black and brown political leaders.
You come to a point where, you can ask folks to participate in a system, but if there's no space for them to sit, then there's not much that they can do. But despite that challenge, I do see that young people are really passionate about holding leaders accountable, about pushing their issues that are important to them to the forefront of the conversation, regardless of whether they can vote or not.
Throughout summer 2020, we have seen young people pour into the streets demanding their seat at the table. Now, just a month shy from Election Day, the question is if those same young people will make their voices heard at the polls.
There's a connection that we can see through data and polling that when young people are engaged in activism and engaging with these issues like the unrest and protests this summer, that it's increasing their engagement with the political system. The Alliance for Youth Justice did a poll in June, and that found that the #1 issue among young voters for this upcoming election was systemic racism and discrimination. And that number was even higher among Black and brown young people within that study.
For me, really, is police reform. That's one of the big things, mass incarceration. And then also just this whole idea of like this capitalistic structure that continues to keep people down. So when we talk about, low-income families, things like that, we want to see more. We want to see just revolutionary change in these positions.
The issues that are most pressing to me in this election, I haven't seen been brought up. All I have seen is the illusion that our promises will be met when Black people have visions. And like with my vision right now, what I see is like I don't see anyone talking about reparations, or I don't see anyone talking about the contradictions of capitalism, or I don't see anyone talking about liberation for Black people, or all the things that are structurally wrong with this society and every reason that we are oppressed. It's just the illusion that Black Lives Matter and we're with you.
According to a study at American University, younger Black Americans make up a key set of swing voters that could impact 2020, voting blue or not voting at all.
We recently did a study of our own, a poll of Wisconsin voters, and we found that among the young voting Black in that poll, that the #1 concern that people had about the election was candidates that they're not excited about or don't like, right? So I think that's the answer, that a lot of people don't really have a desire to engage in options that aren't really going to serve them in the way that they should, right? And so there's definitely this narrative of the lesser of two evils, but in either regard, both sides of the aisle are failing young people and are failing people of color in the communities that we live in. And they're very serious about that standard being met. And I truly believe that it's because we recognize the way that it's threatening our future, right? Like, we are the closest to the effects of the decisions that we make today, right? Those are going to define our future. And so when, you're asking your government to do something that's going to protect your future or ensure your success later in life, that doesn't seem optional. That doesn't seem like a lot to ask, especially from a system that has continually done things to harm your future and to harm your success and hinder it.
both of them historically have shown me that they can't provide anything for the black community. Like I did research on Biden. I seen how he helped pass the crime bill, or I seen how he helped in mass incarceration. I seen with Trump how he wanted those 5 black boys to be put to death, or I seen historically in this state of the world right now, and how he's a byproduct of this ill society. Like I seen through these 2 characters, they're just characters to me.
In a battleground state like Wisconsin, the youth vote could possibly flip the state from red to blue.
A study by Circle at Tufts University found that Wisconsin has the highest youth electoral significance index, which is just a really long way of saying that in Wisconsin, the youth vote is going to be most powerful in terms of, how it compares to the youth vote in other states.
There may be a lack of excitement for the candidates, but many young people of color are still planning to show their power at the polls, remembering the voices that are too often left out of elections.
I haven't really been influenced much by the candidates to go vote, but I'm voting for people who can't right now. So I'm voting for people who are, in jail. I'm voting for people, who will not have the health to get out and vote if they can, or, convicted felons who, have their voting rights taken away from them. So things like that, that's who I'm voting for right now. And for my ancestors too. If it's someone that I believe that the ancestors would leave behind, then I will go make that vote for them.
Alexandria Mack joining us, and clearly we are in the age of COVID. How has that affected voter registration?
So a lot of the organizations I spoke with said that they've moved strictly to digital canvassing. So that's a lot of text messages, phone calls. There's no in-person contact, really. You're seeing a few organizations that have been present at protests doing some pop-up booths, but mostly we're just seeing a lot of digital efforts. You can look at Facebook Lives, Instagram Lives. One of the organizations I spoke with, Lit, they've been doing a lot of civic trainings, I would say, on Facebook. You're seeing a lot of infographics as far as instructions on how to get registered, especially things for like college students. So we don't really know how this is translating in registration numbers, and we don't know how it'll register come election day. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
But are there still efforts to get those votes in person, and how are people staying safe in that process?
There are a few canvassing efforts in person, but they've been largely limited due to COVID. You can see some, like I said, at protests, maybe a pop-up here or there, but for the most part, you're not really seeing people knocking on doors or anything like that. I applaud the young people for going out to some of the protests to get people registered, because we know that's where a lot of young people have been congregating, but you're not really seeing what we are used to seeing this so close to election.
Alexandria Mack, formerly Mason. Congratulations. Some of us know you as Mason, but others as Mack now, as you are married. So
yes,
congratulations.
Thank you so much.
While many people braved the elements and COVID-19 to vote in April, a large number voted by absentee ballot. Many more are expected to do just that for the November election. And joining us now is Claire Woodall-Vogg, Executive Director of Milwaukee's Election Commission. Claire, thank you so much for joining Black Nouveau.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so we are clearly in the age of COVID. Things have changed so much to where folks are voting through an absentee ballot. How do folks do just that?
So in order to vote absentee, you need to put in an application, and voters can do that online at myvote.wi.gov, or they can submit a paper application. If they need us to mail them one, there's still time for us to mail them an application. Or if you live in the city of Milwaukee, you can go to any Milwaukee Public Library through October 14th, Tuesday through Saturday, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., and get some assistance in applying for an absentee ballot.
So what are the differences between an absentee ballot and early voting? I know there's some discrepancy there, so talk about that, please.
So the biggest difference is how you receive your ballot. If you're voting absentee by mail, we're going to mail you your ballot, and you can return it either via mail or using a drop box. We have 15 drop boxes around the city, or you can take it to an early voting location. If you're voting at early in-person absentee voting, you're still casting an absentee ballot, but you're doing so with our staff. So if you have questions, concerns, we're there to assist you, and then you drop your ballot before you leave the polling place at early voting.
And just to clarify for all the folks at home, if you vote absentee or you vote early, you cannot go to the election. You cannot go to the election.
To the real polling place.
To the polling
Correct.
place, absolutely.
So if you, in Wisconsin, if you've returned your ballot, if you have put it in the mail, you've taken it to a drop box, or you voted at early voting, you cannot go to your polling place on election day and vote. The only time you can do that is if your ballot never made it to you or it's still sitting at home on your kitchen table. Then you keep the option to go to your polling place on election day.
You talked a little bit about the ballot boxes. Talk more about them. Where can folks find them, and how will they have access to them?
Yeah, so our ballot boxes are installed at every City of Milwaukee Public Library, the City Hall complex right there on Market Street, and then at our warehouse on South Kinnickinnick Avenue. And they are, I would say, more secure than the U.S. Postal Service boxes that you see in neighborhoods. They have 24-hour video surveillance, tamper-evident seals, and it's our Election Commission staff that pick them up daily. And as we get closer to the election, we will pick them up even more frequently than once a day.
So hopefully we cleared up one mistake. What are some other mistakes that people make when voting absentee or voting early?
So the biggest mistake we see is that every voter is required to have a witness for their absentee ballot. The witness has to sign the highlighted section on the envelope, and then they have to provide their address. Even if they live in the same household, a husband and wife can witness one another's ballots, but they still need to rewrite their home address on that second line. That's the biggest mistake we see. The other one is waiting to the last minute to request your absentee ballot. Election law deadlines are not realistic right now, and how long it takes mail to get to a voter. So the deadline to request a ballot is the Thursday before the election, but if you wait that long, you're not going to have time to actually receive your ballot, vote it, and return it. So we're recommending voters go ahead and make a voting plan early, request your ballot at least 2 weeks in advance. Otherwise, during those last 2 weeks, use an early voting site.
And you mentioned some of those polling places. You have Pfizer Forum, Miller Park. Where are some of the other places people will be able to vote?
Yeah, so the City of Milwaukee will have 15 early voting locations for this election. The big ones are Pfizer Forum, Miller Park, which will be exclusively drive-through early voting, Midtown Center on the north side, Zablocki Library on the south side, and then we have 11 others, UWM, different libraries across the city. Clinton Rose Senior Center is a new addition that will be open every day, but they have a little bit different hours, so you want to check the schedule.
So if you go to a polling place and say there are some issues that come up or an issue comes up, what are some examples of some issues folks have seen going to that polling place, and what can they do about that on that day?
Yeah, so the most important thing is to be prepared. Make sure you look up your polling place at myvote.wi.gov to make sure you're in the right place. Sometimes voters will go to what they think is their polling place, but they'll be redirected. You also want to make sure you bring your photo ID with you. In Wisconsin, you're required to have a Wisconsin driver's license, state ID card, U.S. passport, military ID, veterans ID, certain student IDs will work, but you're not allowed to have an out-of-state driver's license as your proof of photo identification. And that's the case if you're voting on election day or if you're voting absentee or at early voting. So those are the two biggest issues that we see on election day. Another one is making sure you have proof of your address if you need to register to vote. Voters can still register on election day in Wisconsin, but you'll need to bring a proof of address document.
What are some of those things that you can prove your address with?
So common proof of address documents are utility bills, your cell phone bill, bank statement, paycheck, anything from a government agency. If your ID, your Wisconsin driver's license or state ID doesn't have your current address. And that's another thing, your ID doesn't have to have your current address to use it to vote. You just need to bring additional proof of your address.
Oh, that's good to know. So we've seen a lot of these elections be decided by really close numbers, and we have some folks that may not think that their vote count or that their vote counts. So what are some things that the Election Commission are doing to make sure that everyone has access to the ballot and everyone's able to vote and that their vote actually does count?
So most importantly is we are keeping our commitment to neighborhood-based voting. We don't want to ever have the situation that happened on April 7th happen again, where we only had 5 polling places. While absentee by mail is the safest way to vote, it's not the best option for everyone. So some of our commitments have been, we've almost doubled our number of early voting sites. And then we have 173 out of our 180 polling places will be open on election day. And if anyone doubts that their vote counts, in 2016 we saw a drop in voter participation in Milwaukee of over 40,000 voters. The presidential election in 2016 was decided by 23,000 votes. So Milwaukee voters matter more than ever, and their voice is certainly heard, and the lack of their voice also can change the outcome of an election.
And how are you making folks safe as they go to the polling places? How can folks feel safe in this age of COVID, of course?
So I often say that if you feel comfortable going into your neighborhood grocery store, you should feel comfortable going to early voting or your polling place. We have plexiglass shields between our workers and the voters. Everyone's wearing a mask, including voters. Our election workers also have face shields. We're frequently disinfecting surfaces. And we're taking social distancing very seriously. So if you feel comfortable going to your grocery store, I think you'll feel comfortable going to vote. And hopefully by having over 170 polling places open on Election Day, you won't see long lines either.
We have a few seconds left. Anything else you want to share about the election or voting in general?
No, just go ahead and make your plan. Most importantly in this election, it's to make a plan early so that you know what you'll need to vote and make sure that you don't have any issues, whether you're going to vote by mail, go to an early voting location, or wait until November 3rd and vote on Election Day. We want to make sure you have everything you need in order to cast a ballot. And so if you have any questions, you can always call the Election Commission, or the MyVote website has a wealth of information, and that's myvote.wi.gov.
All right, Claire, thank you so much for joining us.
All right.
There is more information for voters on our website at MilwaukeePBS.org. We have links to the League of Women Voters website and My Vote Wisconsin, as well as other information. Also, you may want to check out our Black Nouveau web exclusives. Alexandria Mack interviewed me about joining the Black Nouveau team, and we visit the changes at the We Got This garden at 9th and Ring with Andre Lee Ellis. Coming next week, Dante McFadden, programmer for the Black Lens strand of the Milwaukee Film Festival, will preview some of the films in the festival this year. And that's it for this edition of Black Nouveau. For the team, I'm Earl Arms. Have a good night.